As he walked past me, the elderly man gave me a long, hard stare. By trying to follow the rules, I had upset him. In an effort to show to him that it wasn't personal, that I had nothing against him, I smiled and gave him a thumbs up. But he walked on with the same hard look, clearly furious by my intervention. The whole incident had lasted no more than a few seconds, but it served to remind me of where I was, of who that elderly man was, and how much this meant to him. I realized that up until that moment, I had only been going through the motions, following the instructions I had been given with the best of intentions, but not really connecting with the people that I had come to serve. So from that moment on, I deliberately sought to make eye contact with every individual who came to the table. It was Easter Monday in Brussels, and I was in a functional-looking room on the edge of the Brussels Canal, together with a man from India, a woman from Mexico, 2 young Mormons from Idaho, 2 British ladies, and 2 young women, 1 Ukrainian and 1 Belgian. We were all there volunteering for the association Serve the City, that works with the Red Cross to offer meals and daytime shelter to anyone in need, mainly homeless, refugees and migrants abandoned by the official system. What had I done to make the elderly man so angry? And what did I discover when I made eye contact with others? We'll return to this story in a few minutes. Also in today's letter, why the increasing cost of housing is becoming a European problem. Why the people of Saint-Omer in France were grateful to see the flags of the Netherlands, Slovakia and Czechia arriving in their town. How bureaucratic barriers along our union's internal borders still make life difficult for 130 million Europeans. And
what have we lost today? We lost everything. We lost lives. I cannot even, say it without tears, sorry. It's difficult.
The Mayor of Mariupol gives a timely reminder of what might happen elsewhere if Europe doesn't continue supporting Ukraine. But before we plunge into our letter, here's a short message from the President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola.
The date for the next European election has been set. From the 6th to the 9th of June 2024, every person in every member state will go to vote. European Union democracy is more important today than ever. Your vote matters. It will decide the direction our union will take. It will decide what Europe you want to see. Don't miss out on the next European elections. Get on the register. Be part of the largest democratic exercise in Europe. Do not let someone else choose for you. Vote.
I'm Sean O'Kernean, and this is Letter from Brussels, bringing you stories about the EU's capital city and about the leaders transforming their local communities across the Union. It's brought to you by the Renew Europe group in the European Committee of the Regions. Make sure to follow Letter from Brussels on your favorite podcast platform.
Tere õhtust! Eluase on üks võtmeküsimusi Euroopa Liidus, sest see puudutab meist igaühte.
This is Andres Jaadla, former mayor of the Estonian town of Rakvere and one of Europe's leading experts on housing. He's just completed a report on behalf of the European Union's subnational governments focusing on smart, sustainable and affordable housing. Providing homes to people is an inherently local affair. So why has the EU's Assembly of Municipalities and Regions, the COR, considered that housing needs to be discussed from a European perspective? Here's Andres Jaadla again, as heard through the English language interpreter.
Nurses, policemen can't find affordable housing near their workplaces, and they have to commute for hours. Young people live with their parents in multi-generational households in large cities because they cannot find affordable housing. There is a housing crisis in Europe. Housing is one of the basic pillars of our existence and the key to social cohesion. If we can talk about food security on an EU level, We cannot ignore appropriate and affordable housing. Now we know that the issue of housing is literally everybody's problem. We know that it is Europe's problem. We know that it also affects mobility on the single market. It affects the renovation of the housing stock and entails remarkable energy savings. And we also know that it affects indoor climate in buildings and human health. And this is why, in our opinion, we call for the creation of a European housing plan. We need massive increases in renovations and new developments. Smart renovations will reduce energy poverty and energy costs for families, cities, regions, member states, and on an EU level. We need affordable housing in Europe.
Esimese tasandi aste, kes on eluaseme probleemidega kodanikuga näost näkku. Ma tänan teid väga.
It's impossible to talk about housing in Europe without addressing the one place on our continent where people's homes are being literally bombed to destruction. Indeed, Andres Jaadla's report recalls the partnership that the COR is overseeing between Ukrainian and EU cities to help reconstruct homes in the liberated parts of Ukraine. Unfortunately, some parts of Ukraine are still occupied and others are under increasing threat.
Доброго дня. Попрошу вдягнути навушники. Сьогодні ми будемо говорити українською про Україну.
Vadim Boychenko is the mayor in exile of the occupied city of Mariupol, and he was guest speaker at the COR's recent plenary session. His powerful statement was a timely reminder of what will happen in other parts of Europe if Ukraine doesn't receive the support it needs to defend its territory. Here's Mayor Boychenko, as heard through the English language interpreter.
I am speaking today on behalf of 4 million people. What have we lost today? We lost everything. We lost lives. I cannot even, say it without tears. Sorry. We have tried. We have actually lost our homes. I cannot speak quietly. I mean, it's difficult. We want to have comprehensive approach from the point of view of these 4 million who lost their houses, to give them support in getting new houses. The government of France is supporting with Ukrainian citizens with building social housing. It is very important from the point of view of rebuilding Ukraine. We're aspiring to have the same experience as Gdansk, as Warsaw, as Utrecht and Rotterdam that were reborn after the Second World War. We are aspiring to have the same knowledge. If you are walking around Mariupol, every second house does not exist anymore, and there was life in these houses before. That is why we would like all the crimes to be fixed, to be registered. Today, our boys and girls are losing their lives, protecting our land. My son is today in the armed forces of Ukraine, and he does everything for us to bring back those cities that are occupied today and rebuild the cities. Today, what I hear from the cities, that this cooperation with European cities is very important.
Для нас це дуже важливо. Слава Україні!
Coming up next, why the people of Saint-Omer in France were grateful to see the flags of the Netherlands, Slovakia and Czechia arriving in their town. How bureaucratic barriers along our union's internal borders still make life difficult for 130 million Europeans. Why you need to subscribe to the Streetfield Snapshot. And what had I done to make an elderly man in Brussels so angry? At the recent 10th European Summit of Regions and Cities that took place in the Belgian city of Mons, with nearly 3,000 participants from all over Europe, including the Belgian Prime Minister Alexander De Croo and the European Commission Vice President Vera Jourova, the Renew Europe COR group organized a study visit to the Mons Memorial Museum to mark the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Belgium. Later at the plenary of the summit, our president François Decoster explained that after the floods in his town, when citizens saw the flags of Europe, the Netherlands, Slovakia and Czechia coming to help them, they were reminded that European Union is about solidarity with each other. And he warned that this European solidarity is under threat and must be protected from those who seek to undermine the Union.
Nous ne pouvons pas, nous qui sommes attachés profondément à l'égalité des chances, accepter qu'un jeune ne puisse pas bénéficier en Europe des mêmes perspectives de mobilité, qu'il choisisse de suivre des études supérieures ou qu'il choisisse la voie professionnelle. Et il nous faut réparer cette injustice par l'ambition politique, par l'ambition de terrain portée par les régions et les villes.
President Decoster is also Vice President of the French region of Hauts-de-France, and in that capacity he produced a report which highlights the injustice faced by vocational apprentices who have extremely limited opportunities to pursue their apprenticeships elsewhere in the Union, whereas university students have the extremely popular and successful Erasmus program. This injustice must end, said François Decoster, not just as a matter of principle, but also because businesses all across the Union's regions and municipalities are suffering severe labor shortages.
À titre d'exemple, 40 000 travailleurs frontaliers traversent chaque jour la frontière depuis les Alpes-Maritimes pour se rendre en Italie ou à Monaco pour y travailler. Autre exemple, à l'hôpital de Briançon, 40% des patients et 20% des soignants sont italiens.
In a similar vein, the deputy mayor of the French city of Nice, Magali Altounian, presented her report on the so-called cross-border mechanism, which she worked on with the Renew Europe member of the European Parliament, Sandro Gozzi. The mechanism aims to let citizens access public services on the other side of an internal border of our union. And she highlighted how this mechanism is urgently needed because in her region alone, 40,000 workers cross over into Italy or Monaco on a daily basis to work. And in one of the local hospitals, 40% of patients and 20% of medical staff are Italian. And finally, after the 2020 storms, industrial waste had to be transported by truck several hundred kilometers to Marseille because there is no legal framework that would allow the waste to be transported just over the border to a much nearer facility in Italy. Magali Altounian ended by saying that 130 million people living in the Union's border regions stand to gain hugely from this new mechanism in terms of personal mobility, personal health, and reducing dangerous carbon emissions. The Renew Europe group in the European Committee of the Regions has bid a fond farewell to its newsletter and has introduced Streetfield, a monthly snapshot of how liberals and Democrats are transforming local communities around Europe. Shorter than a 4-minute read, the first edition tells how Bratislava is turning cigarette butts into asphalt, the priorities the Estonian city of Tartu, led by Mayor Urmas Klaas, has for European Capital of Culture this year, the proposals by our agriculture spokesperson, regional minister of Campania in Italy, Nicola Caputo, to help Europe's farmers stay in business while adapting to a changing climate, the policy of a Brussels district to help single residents, and much more. Streetfield comes out every first Tuesday of the month. Subscribe at reneweurope-cor.eu. In a moment, what I learned when volunteering with Serve the City at a Red Cross Centre in Brussels. The elderly man came up to the table and asked the volunteer standing next to me for 3 meals. As my colleague placed the meals in the man's bag, I addressed the Red Cross worker standing at the door behind the man. "Wasn't it just 1 meal per person?" I asked out loud. The elderly man froze and looked up at me, piercing me with his look. The Red Cross worker answered reassuringly, No, he's priority." The priority beneficiaries, mainly the elderly and parents with young children, were allowed several meals. The priority line had already gone through, and we had now switched to the non-priority, which was 1 meal per person. But I hadn't noticed this man coming in via the priority line a little later. As he walked past me, he continued to glare. Embarrassed that I had seemed to be on the verge of depriving him of what he was entitled to, I smiled and gave him the thumbs up. He walked on in silence with anger still in his look. I realized that I should have let it go anyway, and only checked with the Red Cross worker after the man had moved on. The fact was that every single person coming to that center was hungry and had no other means to obtain a well-balanced, nutritious meal. And who was I, as a well-fed, one-day volunteer, to question what they needed? Of course, the Serve the City Association and the Red Cross want to ensure that everyone who shows up has at least 1 meal, and so the distribution has to be managed carefully. But that little incident with the elderly man made me realize that up until that moment I had been going through the motions, following instructions rather mechanically, wanting to help the beneficiaries, but not really engaging with them directly. So from that moment on, I deliberately sought to make eye contact with every one of them. Hundreds of people came through in the 2 hours that the distribution lasted. There were people of all ages, many of them young men from sub-Saharan Africa. They would walk in looking serious, politely take their food, and walk on to the canteen area where they could sit, eat, and chat. But as soon as I made eye contact and smiled, the transformation was incredible. Almost without exception, their face would light up, they would smile back and make a gesture of gratitude, perhaps a nod, sometimes a thumbs up. After the distribution ended, the lady coordinating the work of the volunteers offered to show me the day center next door, known as the Hub. There the beneficiaries could stay warm, read, sleep on chairs or armchairs, recharge their phones, play ping-pong. The women and children had a private area for themselves. The Hub was peaceful, calm, and I thought to myself how much potential there was in that center. These were people who had gone to extraordinary lengths to get here, often experiencing extreme danger, perhaps suffering trauma along the way. And yet, despite being abandoned by the official system, lacking authorizations to work, they were making every effort to provide structure to their lives, seeking the support of the Red Cross and Serve the City, using their digital skills to stay informed, and hoping to get legalized someday. I had earlier overheard one tall young African man chat with the coffee lady, explaining how he's been sleeping on the streets for weeks because there's no shelter available for him anywhere. But every day he still comes to the Hub. How long, I wondered, will he manage to keep doing this without breaking down? One sad case I heard of was of a respected Iraqi engineer who, after months sleeping on the streets, rejected and disrespected by officials and civilians alike, has ended up losing his sanity, permanently roaming the streets of Brussels. A few days ago, and after many years of acrimonious negotiations, European leaders and the European Parliament have approved a new pact on migration and asylum, which will finally bring some order to the Union's borders and undermine the people-trafficking mafias. Although the pact is far from perfect, this is a very welcome and long-overdue development. But as Renew Europe's member of the European Parliament, Jan-Christophe Urchen, wrote after voting in favour of the pact, the next step Europe needs is to find the right balance between, on the one hand, Europe's demographic decline and its acute labour shortages, and on the other hand, a working system of legal entry into the Union coupled with local policies for successful integration of migrants. It is time for the EU, he wrote, to develop a unifying stance towards migration that focuses on the opportunities and benefits for our societies and our economies, rather than on divisive issues that separate us. Meanwhile, at the Hub, near the Brussels Canal, and at hundreds of such centres across the Union, people with talent and potential wait to know if they will be allowed one day to contribute to Europe's future, and mayors all across the Union strive to find ways to integrate them into local communities. For more information on the topics covered in today's letter from Brussels, please visit reneweurope-cor.eu/podcast.